Good evening again. We will now move to our next speech, the final speech of the day by Mr. Patrick Comninos, the Greek CEO of the Basketball Champions League. Mr. Patrick Comninos has managed to turn Basketball Champions League into one of the fastest growing sports properties in Europe. Today, he will talk about a very up-to-date topic, which is adaptability in sports. Mr. Comninos, I'm very happy to welcome you to the Front Runners in Sports Manager 3.0. The stage is yours.
Good afternoon from my side, and it's a pleasure to be part of this very relevant conference. I actually have the honor of following my mentor into the world of sports, Mr. Asimakopoulos, with whom we had the pleasure of working together for 5 long years in preparation of the Athens Olympics. So I am privileged and honored to be in this great company. From my side, welcoming everyone from the cold of Geneva, Switzerland, where the House of Basketball is based and where we have the opportunity to organize this brand new competition, the Basketball Champions League, that is only 4.5 years old. We're now into our 5th season, but a great journey so far, and certainly one that we look very much forward into the future. It's not very often that one has the chance to build a competition from scratch. The Basketball Champions League, as you probably know, did not exist a short while ago, and we're building a competition from absolute scratch. So for us, this is of great relevance, and the fact that we found ourselves during this pandemic in a very unique situation gave us the obligation to adapt ourselves. So I think it's pertinent to share a little bit our approach when it comes to adaptability in sport, and use the test case of the reaction of the Basketball Champions League into this COVID environment. So the biggest challenge, of course, for me is not dealing with COVID. It is trying to share my screen and make sure that everything will work. So here we go. Hopefully everyone can see the BCL presentation, which again will touch the pertinent topic of the COVID impact in the sport industry. It is a short presentation because I hope that it will trigger interest, it will trigger reaction, and very happy to engage in further conversation on this topic, as again, it is something that has affected all of us in the sport industry over the last months. When we speak about our industry, the sport industry, we have to first and foremost identify the uniqueness of our environment. It is a multi-billion industry. In the US alone, it is upwards of $100 billion US dollars. So we are talking about a very relevant segment of the economy. And of course, we would classify ourselves as a sport live entertainment environment. We are not a consumable product that can be shelved, that can be resold later. So in the middle of this pandemic, every event that is not held has direct and financial consequences on the overall impact, both, of course, directly on the competition and its stakeholders, but the greater industry as well. So clubs directly, arenas, broadcasters, sponsors, they are all impacted severely, because again, every day that goes by without a scheduled game taking place is a day that is lost, is revenue that is lost, is opportunity that is lost. So that, I think, it's quite commonsensical, but it's very relevant when we talk about this very unique environment that is sport. Of course, our industry is very much TV dependent. Visibility on television is pertinent and very relevant to all the top sport properties. This is how we generate revenue, how we generate exposure. So, of course, the impact on the clubs, if we speak about the club environment, or the federations, if we talk about the national teams, is very linked to the minimized exposure that the sponsors might get in the event that games are canceled. And of course, this has a trickle-down effect on the overall industry. Of course, how each organization, how each property owner will approach a specific sport depends very much on the relevance that television has for that specific industry. Giving you an example of the NBA, for instance, where TV revenue is of absolute significance. The NBA did invest a considerable amount, upwards of 150 million US dollars last July, to create this famous bubble in Orlando, in Florida, to be able to have games of the NBA, again, not being in a position to afford losing what is very relevant and significant revenue. Similarly, UEFA adapted itself, changed the competition format and the calendar, and for the first time ever held the latter stages of the competition in these week-long events and the Champions League finals in Lisbon, in Portugal. So again, the more dependent a sport property is on TV revenue, the more it will make efforts to safeguard that games are played in one way or the other. For some other sport properties, this does not make sense. Operating or opening and operating the arenas without fans is more expensive than to cancel the games themselves. And this is why we have seen so many sport properties having to have this dilemma and this balance between having games or canceling the season, because again, it's more costly to operate than it is to shut down. So with this background in mind, I would like to share a little bit the way we approached this competition, taking into consideration that there was this abrupt stoppage in our games. The season was suspended on the 13th of March. So we went from 1 week of having all the games played across Europe to having no games played at all. And this, of course, had a very significant impact all across Europe. So when we speak about the European basketball leagues, effectively, almost all of them suspended their activities. The domestic leagues concluded their season, whether it was by declaring a champion following the rankings that were actually taking place at that specific moment. So a picture of the standings on that game day, or some leagues declared what we call a white season, so a season that never took place and was never concluded. We actually had 3 leagues all across Europe that did finish the season. In Germany, they did an end-of-season tournament with 10 teams. This is a good example of teams making these decisions, because out of the entire Bundesliga, the BBL, only 10 teams decided that they wanted to continue. For the others, it was more expensive to play than not to play. It was more costly to continue financing than it was to completely stop. In Spain, the top 12 teams held playoffs, and in Israel, they resumed the season in July. So again, that is meant to put a little bit into perspective how European basketball leagues reacted to this unexpected change of events, or to this new environment that was put before them in the middle of March. On our side, as Basketball Champions League, we were in the middle of our quarterfinals, of our round of 16 leading to the quarterfinals, and we had to stop the season blankly and blandly as well. But we took a very conscientious decision already in the end of March to resume the season in September and to try to conclude it in late September, early October, with a final 8, which was the the most suitable way to conclude the season. What is of interest is that once we resumed the season back in September, we effectively played the third leg of a best of three series with what is probably going to be noted in the Guinness Book of Records, that the third leg game was played 179 days after the second leg game. And these are the paradoxes of what COVID has put in front of us. It's certainly not the ideal situation to have, two games played in March and the third game played in September. But again, it's all about adaptability. It's all about finding the relevant balance between what can be done. And as we sometimes say, take the best of all the worst decisions out there. So we did conclude our round of 16 with these two games that were still pending in September. And then we moved into the final eight in Athens once we had the entire format and the entire composition of the teams in place. And I think this is another element of adaptability where curveballs are thrown our way every single day. Because when we took this decision in March to have the final eight in Athens in late September to early October, we could not foresee that the situation regarding COVID and the pandemic would remain at the same level or even worsened with that famous second wave that came after the summer. And I think nobody has a crystal ball in this world. Nobody can really plan that much ahead in what is a very unknown environment, this COVID-19 pandemic. So we effectively sort of planned for the worst and hope for the best. But to be honest, we chose Athens because at the time, Greece's reaction to COVID had been exemplary. The numbers and the indicators were very low. So we felt that choosing Athens gave us a level of comfort, a level of confidence that we would be able to have the event. And at the end of the day, it was a challenge. It was an uphill battle because of everything that happened, after the summer, not just in Greece but in many countries with a second wave. And suddenly we were faced with a very challenging situation of trying to impose the strictest of COVID protocols in what is arguably a very difficult environment. Basketball is an indoor sport, is a contact sport. So, of course, we do take all of these elements into consideration. But at the end, we were very happy to be able to have this event in Athens and to be able to, at the end, deliver a TV product, because without spectators in the arenas, this is what sport has become, a made-for-TV product. So with this, I take a short break just because I wanted to share with you some images from the final eight in Athens, not just because I am a proud Greek, but I am a proud CEO of an organization that was able to finish the season, crown a champion, the only European competition that crowned a champion this year, and one of the few around the globe that did so. Because at the end, we are all working in the sport environment. We all love sport. We all respect the athletes and their efforts. So we felt it was essential for them to be given an environment, to be given the conditions where they could perform their utmost. So hopefully this will now work, and hopefully you will all enjoy.
Mr. Comninos, could we please increase the volume because the sound is really low? You need to share your sound when you're sharing the screen, please. Mr. Comninos,
No?
can you hear me? We cannot hear the sound of the video. Maybe you need to reshare your screen, including the sound, or share the sound.
I understand you cannot hear,
Yes, we cannot hear the sound of the video. You need to share your sound.
but
And
when
please,
we did it before, it was working very well.
could we give it one more shot and replay the video so that attendees will be able to enjoy it?
Okay, I will put it at the beginning. You see, this is adaptability.
Adaptability, indeed.
Well, hello,
Great.
everybody.
Better now?
Athens, Greece.
Yes.
The Basketball Champions
Thank
League
you so much.
final is underway. He is on fire.
So this was the final eight in Athens, where the Spanish team of Burgos beat the hosts of AEK Athens and won the competition. For us, this is a very good example of the adaptability producing this level of an event where we are able to demonstrate to the world the sort of efforts that are put in place is not easy when this is organized within a COVID environment. And to host games of this magnitude without fans now has become very common, but back in September was not necessarily the case. It was the first event that kicked off or tipped off this season, and certainly trying to create at the end a made-for-TV product required a lot of significant efforts. This is not something that comes naturally to broadcasters who are used to move the camera and show spectators and show the atmosphere and really have to focus on just the players. So that is what happened back in September, and it was the first demonstration, if you want, of this adaptability. But for us, the biggest challenge was to start a new season. Back in October, we all realized that the COVID situation around Europe was not going to get any simpler. And we had to take some critical decisions about safeguarding the continuation of the competition and making certain that we would reach the stage that we would hope, the next stage of the competition, in a manner that minimized our risk and our exposure. So with this in mind, we took a very brave, if I can say, decision back in September, where we effectively changed the format of the competition. We had conducted a draw back in July, which followed our traditional format, which is 32 teams split into 4 groups of 8 teams each. And that has, just for the regular season, a total of 224 games. And we knew that trying to host 16 games every single week was challenging. And we're putting ourselves in front of risks relating to positive COVID cases or to challenges in traveling. Let's not forget the Basketball Champions League is played in 15 different countries across Europe, not all of them having the same jurisdiction or the same travel requirements and restrictions. So we took this, as I said again, brave, but in retrospect, correct decision to change our format, to adapt to this new state of affairs. And the 4 groups of 8 teams were converted into 8 groups of 4 teams. So same number of teams, but instead of having another 7 opponents in your group, each team had another 3 opponents. So that decreased the regular season games from 224 to 96. And we're very proud that up to date we have played all the games that were scheduled to be played. But again, this is not something that was so simple. And it did take a lot of convincing both of our clubs, but also of the various stakeholders, broadcasters, sponsors, that realized that the exposure they were getting was considerably lower than what they had been signed up for. But as I always say, this year it's not about starting a competition, it is about finishing. It is about reaching the ultimate stage. It is about crowning once again the champion. So our adaptability in this sense meant that we had to change our format, but we still maintained a similar duration in our calendar. We split the groups whereby 1 week it would be groups A, B, C, and D playing, and the following week it would be groups E, F, G, and H playing, which meant that we still offered a same duration from October until late January, which again allowed us to have almost a similar exposure, although the content itself had obviously decreased. And now we have taken another decision that the top 16, our playoffs, will also face a different format. Usually we would have best of 3 series among the top 16 teams. But now, in order to balance the commercial exposure that was decreased or lost during the regular season, we are moving into another group format. So the top 16 teams, they will be split into 4 groups of 4 teams each, guaranteeing another 12 games for the top 16 clubs. So effectively, the top 16 clubs will have played a minimum of 12 games in the latter stages of the competition. So 6 in the first round and 6 in the second. So that, I think, balances our approach. But of course, to be very honest, when we took this decision in October, March seemed very distant, very far into the future, and certainly no mutation or variant of COVID-19 was foreseen. No third wave was anticipated. We were keeping our fingers crossed by spring these issues would be resolved. So once again, we are faced with a challenge. We need to see how the situation around Europe will develop in March, and to see in what final status this competition will be when March comes around the corner. So again, we've had to adapt. We've had to create these playoffs with 4 groups of 4 teams each, and then once again move directly into the final 8. We do not have space in the calendar for quarterfinals, so the top 2 teams from each group will go to the final 8. And again, this is all about adjusting, about adapting, about showing flexibility and showing creativity in what is traditionally a very rigorous and conservative environment. But I think if there's one lesson out of COVID, not just for the sport industry, but for the entire society, is that we should not take anything for granted, and we should always be ready to adapt and to adjust. For us, what has been very relevant as we adapt and as we adjust into this new environment is this return to play protocol. Because in order to get permission from the relevant authorities to reopen arenas, to have teams train, we needed to demonstrate that we would take all the necessary precautionary measures. So the FIBA Medical Advisory Group has developed this very detailed, very analytical return to play protocol, which provides guidelines for all the team delegations in the games on how they should be organized. And of course, we have taken additional provisions in the event that a game is postponed, how it is rescheduled, when it is rescheduled. Again, hoping to have reached that stage that we're proud to have 100% of our scheduled games have been completed. We just have 8 games next week. But to give you an example, France just announced today that they're changing and making entry regulations a lot harder for non-EU travelers. And Hapoel Jerusalem is scheduled to travel to Limoges next week. So we have spent our entire day today trying to address this issue, trying to highlight the importance and the relevance of sport and the uniqueness and the protocols that we have put in place. So again, this is daily life in the sport world, and it is again all about adapting and adjusting. I think another point that is of relevance is the impact of fan attending the games. 40% of a club's revenue is driven from ticket or indirect in-game spending. So this is the amount of money that one will pay for a ticket, but it is the additional revenue that is spent on security and stewarding by the concession stands, the hospitality, the catering, the sponsor activation. So all these are additional costs and revenues in an event. So all of these ancillary activities, the parking, the merchandising, the F&B just around the stadium, should be taken into consideration when we explore the impact of fans not attending. It's not just that a player is impacted and his salary might be impacted, but the pizza place outside the stadium that is used to serving fans after the game has not seen any business for the last month. So the industry is certainly being impacted, and I think if there is one wish from everyone in our world, it is to be able to return to normality, to have fans back into the arenas, and to be able to relive the moments that we have all been used to reliving. For us, in our environment, what we have observed as being another industry uniqueness is that our clubs have to play both national and international competitions. But in both of these environments, they have a significant decrease in revenue because of lack of fans in the arena or other decreases in revenue, whether it is sponsors or television. But at the same time, they have to be fully operational. They have to keep a full roster. They have to continue delivering at a higher standard, but acknowledge that their revenue is significantly reduced. So they don't have the opportunity to mitigate. They don't have the luxury as a hotel owner would, for instance, and say, okay, I work with half the staff during this period because I only have half the rooms sold. A sports team, a basketball team needs to pay the full roster of players, the coach, the physio, the trainer, the whole administrative staff, because it is having games every single week. But a key revenue source is being withdrawn. And that is something that we see impacting the marketplace considerably. They cannot reduce any of the costs. They have a lot of inelastic expenses, but again, the revenues are decreased. And of course, what we have seen and what has impacted our industry tremendously is the variation in the national regulations impacting travel. One country will have one set of rules and another one will have a very different set of rules. I just mentioned to you the example of France that from one day to the next has made the rules more strict and therefore impacting the entire industry. We have had a lot of discussions at the European Union level, trying to identify the specificity and the uniqueness of sport and to adapt to these new conditions. Let's not forget, in sports, we are talking about a low risk group. We're talking about young athletes that are getting tested 3 times a week. So, and who travel together as a group, who do not go out and mingle into society. So this has not been simple, and we have done a lot of cohesive efforts with all the other federations in order to have a common approach. But again, this has not been so simple. And of course, the cost impact on industry leaders is significant, whether these are broadcasters, these are commercial entities, or these are the big clubs. Finally, I think adaptability under COVID can also be summarized in what we all face, which is a damage control strategy. All the clubs have now adapted their contracts. They have adapted the duration of the contract. They have adapted the salaries, and they have all included now COVID clauses, something that was not ever foreseen before, whereby if a season is not concluded because of COVID, then the player will receive a percentage of his overall salaries. And of course, this is logical. We live in an environment where for sponsors, the first marketing aspect of their budget that they will cost is advertising in sports or in promotional activities. This is sometimes perceived as a luxury, not as a must-have. So of course, this has a trickle effect on all of us. Now we have a lot of commercial agreements that are conditional on the games being played. So whether it is a broadcaster or a sponsor, they will say if less than 50% of the games are played, we do not pay anything. We need at least 80% of the games to be played, and so forth and so on. So this has become quite a challenge, and one where, again, everyone in the industry has needed to adapt, to find creative ways in order to ensure against what COVID has brought upon us. They cannot actually insure, because now no insurance company will of course insure against the cancellation of the event. So everybody needs to be creative and find their own means to adapt to this current environment. So with this in mind, I conclude my presentation, and I thank you for your attention, and happy to follow up.
Mr. Comninos, thank you for a very insightful and fruitful presentation. For our esteemed attendees, don't forget to use our hashtag FrontRunners2021 and also send your questions to Mr. Comninos under the streaming that you see on your screen. We have many questions for you. I would like to start with one that is particularly interesting. So this is from Alexis Costabasis, who is first of all congratulating you for the presentation. And he's discussing that the biggest issue in Europe today is a collaboration between your organization and EuroLeague. But how can this be possible without the downgrading any of the two products?
Okay, so Alexis jumped straight into the elephant in the room. I think basketball is going through a very interesting phase, not an ideal phase, I would say, but certainly one where different philosophies are being very visible. And this is not necessarily happening in basketball alone. It's happening around the sports world, where institutional governing bodies and private entities are cohabitating in this environment. And I think the biggest challenge that we have in approaching European basketball and the existing landscape relates to very variant, very different philosophies between us and our friends in Barcelona, in ECA, and in the EuroLeague. We obviously represent the institutional governing body that is FIBA, and what is known to all of us that work in the world of sport as the pyramid of sport, which means that there is no elevator that takes you directly to the penthouse, that takes you directly to the top floor. Teams, athletes need to play at the local, at the regional, at the national level, and the European participation should be a reward and not a guarantee. And that is the way an institutional governing body such as FIBA perceives the development of basketball, because this is the only way new players will develop. This is the only way the sport will grow organically. We fully respect that there's another philosophy out there that says we are focused on the interests of the top clubs and how they will generate more revenue. And these are contrasting philosophies, especially when the interests of the one overlap the needs or the visions of the other. And I think that there are a lot of things that we have in common, but there are also certain points where we have very different philosophical approaches. The way we as an institutional body respect and promote the national competitions, and obviously safeguard and promote the national teams, because we do believe, and for us this is essential. It's part of the world governing body's DNA, that basketball around Europe is played by hundreds of clubs and not by a handful of clubs, and we need to look and serve the interests of the vast majority of them. So again, it is a challenging environment, and it is one where all sides need to take into account of what is best. Of course, the end result has to be how to increase the commercial value of our sport, and I think that this is where the bottom line stands. Basketball remains without a doubt the second most popular sport in Europe after football, but it does not capture the marketplace in a representative manner of what the second sport in popularity should. And that is an inherent problem that we are all facing, and we are proposing a specific model for addressing this, a model that is inclusive, a model that does not exclude any clubs, does not exclude any country, but wishes to grow organically in a manner where all the clubs and all the countries are represented or given a chance. And that is a philosophy that goes hand in hand, again, as I said, with the greater mission, vision, and obligation that the world governing body has towards the development of the sport.
Thank you so much for such a compact answer that addresses many of the concerns also about revenues. Allow me to ask you one more question from Konstantinos Plestis. He's a student of Diri at the American College of Greece and personal student of mine. So how do you plan to increase the revenue in the COVID era? You discussed the commercial strategy because we see that the revenue in European basketball is generally very smaller, which makes sense, than other sports, and especially as compared to football. Thank you for your speech.
Thanks to Konstantinos for his question. I think that what COVID has taught us is that we can, as industry, as a sport industry, be so dependent on certain specific revenue sources. In our industry, and depending on the club or depending on the environment, it's TV, it's sponsors, and it's ticketing. This has been the traditional process, and any commercial manager in any club will tell you that they are trying to find the ideal balance in their environment between sponsorship, TV, and ticketing. And that has created a level of complacency. Now, what COVID has forced us all to do is find new sources, trying to be creative, try to think a little bit outside the box, not necessarily by vision, but by necessity. Giving you an example, we, as FIBA organized during the break when there were no games, an extensive esport competition. Because again, content was required and content was not offered because the season was suspended. So suddenly we had a global esport competition that created tremendous interest. Players from all over the world were competing against each other, and this is where the virtual world does support such an initiative. Of course, different types of sponsors came on board because, you know, the traditional ones will opt for the LEDs or the court stickers. Some different types of sponsors will perhaps embrace an esport environment. So this is just one example of the need to becoming more creative and finding solutions outside the traditional means. Obviously, the digital world is providing an extensive footprint of areas and ideas that could be used in order to becoming more creative and more commercially driven. So I think COVID has forced us all to rethink a little bit, move out of the traditional mode and realize, for instance, that we might have an entire season without fans. What does that represent? How do we maintain fans' engagement? How do we still capture their interest and their worthy pockets without having the games played with them in the arena? So this is where, again, specific ideas have been brought up on how to increase the exposure on the revenue side, how to have virtual fans in the venues and so forth and so on. So again, for me, what is the most important part is how many of these lessons do we keep after COVID has hopefully departed? Because I think that it has been an eye-opener. We have all learned that we cannot rely on what we consider the safety or the tradition of television and sponsorship, but we need to be creative and find other ways to survive in a sense. And the clubs and the organizations that are going to keep these lessons are the ones that are going to have a brighter future.
Thank you so much, Mr. Comninos. One more question that regards last year Basketball Champions League. So it did not only manage to adapt so quickly and adjust the format of the competition, but also managed to set an example on how to hold a COVID-free final phase with 0 positive tests for everybody involved. How challenging was that based on the fact that we're talking about teams from different countries, with each country having different regulations as well as health protocols?
No, thank you for this question, and thank you for the kind words. It is indeed true. We organized the Final 8 in Athens. It was actually held between Wednesday and Sunday, but as I always said, the event is not going to be completed until the next Sunday, when all the teams have returned home and have tested. And we are extremely happy that all the 8 delegations left Greece. Well, 7 left, 1 remained in Greece, but all of them in the follow-up tests, PCR tests, were all producing negative results. And that for us was a big target because, of course, the image of an event and an organization would be greatly impacted if suddenly 3 or 4 teams around Europe all experienced COVID symptoms due to the fact that they cohabitated in our official hotel. We do not call it a bubble as such because we have to be open and honest. It was not 100% bubble. What we managed to do, and again, to answer the question, is put in place very rigorous protocols. So everyone that attended the Final 8, and especially everyone that was accredited, had to provide a negative PCR test before receiving his or her accreditation. This went from the president of FIBA that attended the event to the last volunteer, and we had about 450 volunteers, all of them undergoing tests before receiving their accreditation. So we already knew that the OACA arena would be well protected. And then what we did, effectively, we created a zone between the airport, the hotel, and the arena where everything was monitored, everything was not just sanitized literally, but sanitized in a protective manner. The buses were cleaned. They were dedicated buses for every team. They were cleaned after each presence. It was the same driver every day for the same team. So all the small details that put the whole puzzle into place. But and here I have to be very thankful to the support we received, firstly by the Greek government that helped us coordinate this. For instance, all these tests that were put in place were a generous donation from the region of Attica, and there were considerable number of tests. We had a very close collaboration with the Ministry of Sport and other relevant ministries in order to define the protocols that would allow us to have this event. And of course, we worked very closely with our host club, with AEK Athens, because without a home team, without a club that takes care of all the small details, we cannot suddenly have 7 teams arrive and find the level of support and comfort that they expect. So for us, this was a monumental undertaking, especially being the first that went out into the sport marketplace to organize such an event in our industry here in Europe.
Mr. Comninos, thank you very much. This will have to be the end of the Q&A sessions because we have extended time, though there are many questions that could be forwarded to you by the runners in sports management. Thank you so much for being here today to honor us. You have to seem to have a personal following, and many greetings will be transferred to you after the speech.
It helps that I am speaking to a lot of my countrymen, and I appreciate this very much. Thank you and good continuation, and thank you for the excellent moderation.
Thank you so much.